Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us today for this live stream event. My name is Alexia, and I am the program manager of the Microsoft Reactor Toronto. I will be sharing session resources with you in the chat, but before we begin, I'd like to quickly review two items: our code of conduct and event guidelines. First, please take a moment to review our code of conduct. Microsoft Reactor seeks to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and presenters. We encourage engagement in the chat, but please be mindful of your commentary, remain professional and on topic. And secondly, our event guidelines. The session is being recorded and will be available on demand through the Microsoft Reactor YouTube channel in about 24 to 48 hours. I will be sharing the link in the chat for our on-demand content. And if you have not been on a live stream through YouTube before, please note that you must create an account on YouTube in order to have access and interact in the chat. You can set that up now, and if you're unable to use the chat but have questions, feel free to reach out to us through social media or on our website. Which brings us to today's session. I'm going to bring in our speaker here for today, Richard. Hi, Richard. How are you?
Hi, Alexia. Doing well. How about yourself?
Fantastic. We're very excited to have you here for the first time on the Reactor. Thank you so much for joining us and hosting this session with us.
Glad to be here.
Great. Well, without further ado, just take it away.
Great. Thanks, Alexia. So hi, everyone. My name is Richard Awasa. I'm an Azure App Innovation Technical Specialist with Microsoft. So I actually cover our Azure application services along with some of our data and AI services as well. So today we're going to actually be talking about one service in particular, Azure AI Document Intelligence. So the agenda for today's session is we're going to be starting off by talking about why you would want to automate the processing of documents and what the basic workflow would look like. We'll next introduce the Azure AI Document Intelligence service and talk about the different types of models that we have within that for analyzing various different types of documents. After that, we'll review the steps for how to actually train a custom model for those times when you might have a more complicated form that doesn't fit any of the out-of-the-box options. We'll review an end-to-end solution architecture and talk about what that would look like. We'll have then a demo of some of the features. So we'll sort of show some of the concepts that I talked about earlier in the presentation. And then finally, we'll end off with a Q&A session. So I'll be holding off on answering any of the questions until then. But as we go, certainly as you have questions, I'll put them into the chat as we go. So first off, I want to talk about sort of the number of all the different types of use cases that we have in terms of processing documents and kind of automating that process. So you've got a lot of industries that need to, do something with documents that they receive from their customers, partners, vendors, and others that they come in. So it could be anything from health records or forms or requisitions to financial documents and application forms, and things like purchase orders or invoices. A lot of companies today still use people to actually read those documents and then retype the information into a backend system. So, people are great at interpreting sort of poor quality documents and scans and images, but it can be really time consuming and labor intensive to do that. So where Azure AI Document Intelligence can come in is it can help with automating a lot of the process so that people, instead of just doing rote data entry, they can focus on reviewing the extracted data and making decisions instead. So if we talk about what sort of the basic workflow looks like for automating the processing of documents, it all starts with ingestion. So typically you're going to have documents that might be uploaded by customers or users into some sort of web portal. They could be, mailing stuff in physically or faxing stuff into a mailroom, or they might be attaching documents to an email. In the case of, physical copies, somebody in a mailroom is actually going to be feeding these things through a scanner to actually create a digital version. So once you've kind of ingested your documents and you have them in a digital form, the next step in the process is going to be to classify the files and extract the data that they contain. So classification might be something manual, like dropping a file into a particular folder, or it could be an automated step, like using optical character recognition or OCR to extract text and then maybe look for a particular form code on the form, like at the bottom of the page, or looking for a barcode or a QR code. Once you know the type of document, then you can run it through OCR to get the raw text out, or you can use a machine learning model, as we'll talk about later in this presentation, to get specific values based on their location on your form. And then finally, once you've extracted this data, you might need to do some post-processing on it. So like validating that data against other internal systems. So like looking up a customer record or looking up an invoice and comparing values. Those kind of extracted and validated data values can then be used or acted upon or sent to downstream systems. And it's important to kind of keep in mind from the perspective of responsibly using AI that you really should be looking to keep humans in the loop when acting on the data that you've extracted, especially when you've got high stakes scenarios or sensitive data. So things like awarding benefits, granting a loan, or improving an insurance payout, things like that. It's really important that you keep human beings in the loop to make decisions on that data. So our main service in the Azure platform for helping with this document process automation is our Azure AI Document Intelligence service. So this service can actually extract data from both unstructured documents, so something like a letter, as well as structured documents like an application form. So you can use pre-trained models that we have built into the service for specific document types. So things like invoices or receipts that you get like at a restaurant, passports and other ID documents, and things like that. Or you can train a custom model to operate on your own document types. So you might have a custom application form or a custom requisition form or a custom invoice that maybe doesn't quite fit one of our predefined models. As with all our Azure services, there's a lot of enterprise features built into document intelligence. So you can lock down inbound and outbound access using things like firewalls or private endpoints. And you can secure access using role-based access control and managed identities. It's also important to keep in mind that we don't train our own predefined models on your data. Your data that you upload to the service is strictly for your uses. Microsoft doesn't train any of our own stuff on that. It's also important to keep in mind that today, while we'll be talking strictly about sort of automating the processing of documents, Azure AI Document Intelligence is actually often used these days in conjunction with Azure OpenAI. So in scenarios where you might want to summarize a document or ask questions about the information that's contained in a file, like a contract PDF or something like that, Azure AI Document Intelligence is used in a lot of those cases to work in conjunction with OpenAI to do the initial extraction of the data before you send it to Azure OpenAI and ask it questions about your data. So to actually use this service in your own programs and applications, you can make RESTful API calls to the service, or you can use one of our SDKs in the languages that I've got shown on the screen there in the lower left-hand corner. So how this actually works is, in your program, you would be making a call out to the service, through a REST API call or through the SDKs. And as part of the body of that request, you would actually send the document that you want to analyze. And that could be like an image or a PDF or things like that. An alternative way to do this, if let's say the documents may be too big to send in a single request, you could provide the URL of a blob in a storage account so that the document intelligence service can actually pull it from there if it's got the right permissions. Once the document intelligence service has that document, it will actually use a machine learning model to extract the data from that file and return the results to you as a JSON document. So that JSON document adheres to a specific schema. So from there, you can get things like the layout of where information appears on the form. You can get tables that might appear on the form or grids, as well as individual field data that's on the form as well. So here you can kind of see an example of a summary of kind of what that JSON structure looks like. And in this example, in the documents element of that JSON document, you can see I have a couple of predefined fields that I've created in a custom model. And you can see it's extracted out not only of values, but it's given a confidence level as to how confident the model is that it extracted that data correctly. So within the service, there's actually 3 different types of machine learning models that you can use to analyze files and extract data out. So first off, we've got some general document analysis models. So these will do things like just extract out raw text, like just basically doing OCR to get whatever text appears in the document. We've got a layout model that will actually get the locations of elements on the form. So things like where does text appear on the form relative to like the top corner, and things like being able to detect what languages are in a form, like, oh, this contains English and French or German or Spanish or what have you. In the middle, you can see a list of predefined models that we have built into the service. So these are sort of standard type forms where you don't have to custom train anything. We've just taken a whole corpus of sample documents, like thousands of examples, and then trained machine learning models for those particular types of documents. So those could be things like legal agreements or contracts, invoices or billing statements, things like receipts, vouchers, or hotel statements, or ID documents, so things like passports or driver's licenses or residency permits. And then finally, on the right-hand side, we have custom models. So this is for examples where maybe the predefined models don't really work on your particular documents because they're too complex. Maybe they have very particular layouts and you need to get out particular values on there. So you can use a custom model in those cases. And we really have two different types of custom models. And really the difference behind them is kind of how it works on the back end in terms of the types of machine learning models and things like that that we use. So the most common one is what we call a custom template extraction model. So this is really meant for documents that have a very structured, consistent format with a static layout. We also have a custom neural model that's used for, it can actually cover a bunch of different things. So it can cover, once again, structured documents, semi-structured documents, well, maybe there's some variation in terms of the layout or what appears in the form. And then finally, unstructured documents, so things like letters and the like. The general recommendation or best practice is that you try starting with a custom neural model unless there's something that you need that isn't covered by the neural model, like a particular language that is not supported, or a feature like signature detection, like figuring out that somebody has signed a form, in which case you might have to use a custom template model. You can also combine a bunch of these custom models, whether it's several custom neural models or several custom template models, into what we call a custom a composed model, which allows you to kind of analyze different types of documents with a single endpoint. And I'll kind of show an example of this in a second. And then finally, a custom classification model, very similar to the custom composed model, except it doesn't actually perform any data extraction. It just tells you what model should be used for a particular form. Below each sort of set of models in each column, you can kind of see the different types of document formats that each model supports. Generally speaking, when you're working with this service, you'd really be using PDFs or image files for that kind of thing. So here's an example of kind of what it looks like when you analyze a receipt using our predefined or pre-trained receipt model. So basically here we've got an example of uploading an image that somebody might have taken of a receipt. So a very common use case in this case would be for, an expense reporting system where, you're filing your travel expenses from a business trip, you take a picture of your receipt. You can use Document Intelligence to automatically extract out data. So it can do things like here to see, what was the vendor, what was the vendor's address and phone number, what were the line items on that receipt, what was the tax, the subtotal, tips, and the final total, so that you can automatically extract that and say pre-populate an expense record in your expense system. Here we've got an example of an invoice that's been analyzed using the pre-trained or predefined invoice model. So here, Microsoft has kind of created a model, and we've had added standard fields that you would typically see in an invoice, things like who is the customer, who's the vendor, addresses, contact info, line items within the invoice, and subtotals and taxes and grand totals and things like that. So all of that stuff is pre-trained to be extracted from those types of models. And then finally, we've got custom models. So this is where you take your own samples of your own forms, predefine, and then you sort of say what fields are going to be on this form. And then basically you train several samples so that the model understands or learns where on the form certain fields will appear. And I kind of walk through what the steps look like for that, and then I'll actually walk through a demo of that as well. So if you're building a custom model out, there's a few steps that you would typically follow. So the first thing is you have to collect a set of documents that you use to train the model. For a custom template model, you need a minimum of 5 samples. For a custom neural model, the minimum number of samples you need is 1. Ideally, though, that you're using a larger number of samples. with different sort of image qualities, different sets of fields filled out, and at least one of those samples should have every field on the form filled out. That's what the model will use to train itself to recognize the data and where your different field values actually appear on those forms. So once you've got those training samples, however many you have, you would then upload them to an Azure Blob storage account so that the Document Intelligence service will be able to pull those when it's actually training a model. The next thing you do is in our Document Intelligence Studio, which I'll show as part of the demo, you would actually go in, create a new project, point it at the storage account where you've uploaded all those samples. You'll define the list of fields that you have in your form that you actually want to extract. And it doesn't have to be everything on the form. It could just be certain pieces of information that you really want to extract. Or it could be absolutely every little checkbox and box and field and text field and things like that on the form as well. So it's really up to you what you define. Each field that you define will also have a data type. So it could be a string, it could be a number, it could be a date, it could be a checkbox, or it could be a signature field. Specifying the data type can help the backend service more correctly identify kind of the data as it's trying to extract it out. So once you've got your list of fields defined, it'll actually then take each piece of data that you've got in your sample and you'll tag it to what field it corresponds to. So such that, maybe I've got some text appearing on the field, I would highlight that and say this belongs to the customer name field, or the same for the invoice date field and things like that. Once you've done that tagging process for all the samples that you have, you just click a button to train the model. And a custom template model will train within a few seconds to a couple of minutes. Neural model may take tens of minutes to actually train, just because it's a little more complicated to actually create that model in the back end. Once you've got a trained model, then within the Document Intelligence Studio, you can actually upload a new sample and then actually test out your model to see whether it's actually extracting out the data into the proper fields correctly. So it'll give you a confidence level about how confident it was about, I extracted this text for the invoice date field, and it's got like a 97% confidence that that extraction is correct. The nice thing about this too, and then you can also see the JSON output from the service as well. So that the advantage of that JSON output is that it is corresponds to a very well-defined schema that when you're building sort of programs to do something with that data downstream, it's really easy to parse through that document and find out, oh, here's where the invoice date value is, or here's where the customer name field was. Whereas with some of the pre-trained or predefined models, in some cases we will try and create the name of a field based on what we can OCR out of the document. So it might not necessarily be 100% consistent from form to form if you've got some poor quality forms. So using a custom model, you always get a consistent set of field names that make it really easy to programmatically manipulate the data afterwards. I mentioned sort of a little earlier on about the concept of a composed model. So in this example that you see on the screen here, we've got a couple of different types of US tax forms, like a 1040 and a 1099. Now, in your document analysis workflow, you might not have the ability to say, oh, okay, this is a 1099 form, so therefore I'm going to send it against a 1099 model to actually do the data extraction. You might just want to say, well, I just want to send this document once and let the service figure out, okay, well, what model should it use? Well, what you can do is you can combine those two custom models on the left into a single composed model. And then when you've got a document in your workflow, I send it against the service and say, use the composed model, not an individual custom model, to analyze that document. What happens then is that the service will actually look at this document, use the composed model to figure out, okay, this PDF that the user uploaded, it's actually a 1099 model, so you should use the 1099 custom model to actually analyze this. Or they uploaded a 1040 form, therefore you should use the 1040 custom model to actually do that, to analyze and extract out the data. So it kind of streamlines the steps that you would have to do. You don't have to kind of do pre-analysis of what type of form this is to figure out what model would be best to use. You could just use a composed model and let the service worry about that. A custom extraction or classification model is somewhat similar, but rather than actually doing the data extraction, it will do the same thing. It will say, here, you've uploaded this PDF. This is the model that should be used, but it won't actually extract out the data. So the reason you might want to use that custom extraction as opposed to a custom composed model would be if you want to have a little more control over whether or not you actually make a call and incur the cost for doing the data extraction. You can use that classification model instead of the composed model. So, but both fundamentally work the same way. It sort of figures out for you what model is the ideal one to use for a given PDF or a given page within a document. If we kind of then look at kind of in a bit more detail, what would the logical kind of workflow look like for using the document intelligence service in automating a sort of an end-to-end workflow? So, first off, as we've been talking about, you're going to have a training phase where you're going to upload sample documents to a storage account. You're going to train a model on them, validate the model, and then, maybe monitor its performance over time. When you actually have documents to process, what you'll do is you're going to ingest them from a variety of different sources, whether that's, like we said before, users uploading it to a portal, or, systems uploading it directly to a storage account, or, somebody in a mailroom scanning stuff in and dropping it into a file location. You're going to ingest all that stuff somewhere into a central location. From there, you're going to have kick off a process to actually take those documents from storage, run it through the document intelligence service using whatever model is appropriate, and getting that extracted data back. You may then do some post-processing on that data. So you might say, oh, here's all the JSON the service return. Maybe I have to correlate it to stuff in another system within my thing. Maybe I need to clean up the data a little bit, normalize it, or translate it to a particular consistent language, things like that. So you might do some post-processing in your own code afterwards. And then finally, once you've got all that data, you're likely going to store it somewhere in a downstream system or database or data lake or something like that, so that it can actually be used and consumed by other applications or tools within your organization. If we kind of translate that now to what it would actually look like using actual Azure services. So first off, you're going to ingest your data in somewhere. So in this example, we're showing maybe you might have a logic app workflow that's triggered off when it sees a file appear in a storage account, or when it receives sees something uploaded to an FTP server. So it's going to take those files, however they're ingested, and then drop them into a single storage location in an Azure storage account. That in turn might then fire off, say, an event grid trigger that says, oh, hey, here's a new file that's been created in a storage account. It might click off like an Azure function or another logic app workflow that will actually execute code that will call out to the document intelligence service, say, here's this document I need you to analyze. And then that code will then actually get that response back from the document intelligence service. Like we said before, it might do a little post-processing on that as well. And then finally, it's going to save that to some sort of data store. So in this case, it could be a Cosmos DB database, could be a data lake, could be anything. And then finally, your downstream systems, or maybe have things like Power BI reports or something like that, will then act on that extracted data. So next off, let's take a look at what does this actually look like in the actual Azure portal. So I am going to switch over so you can kind of see that. So first off, if you're creating a new service in the Azure portal, you can just go to the search box at top and just search for document intelligence, and you can pick the document intelligences item, and then you can create a new resource. It's very straightforward. It's very similar to a lot of our other Azure cognitive services or AI services that you may have seen, like our speech service or a vision service and things like that. So you just pick the resource group that you want to put your resource in. You pick the region where you want to do this. I'm in Canada, so I will pick it there. Give your resource a name. You pick a pricing tier. There is a free tier of this resource that has some limits, but you can actually use this to try it out. So if you want to, maybe play around with this system first to see if it might be of some use for you without incurring any costs, you can pick the free tier, or you can pick the standard tier. That's what you would be using for all your production use cases. Then just click next. If you want to lock the network access down, like for inbound access, you can put this behind a private endpoint. You can activate the firewall for the service, just like our other services, or in this case, I'm just going to leave the public endpoint enabled. When you authenticate to this, you will have to provide a key to actually access the service, very similar to a lot of our other services as well. You can assign a managed identity to the service as well. So if you want to have the document intelligence service access a storage account to pull either training files or actual uploaded files for analysis. You can do that through using managed identity. So you can activate that there. It could be system assigned or user defined as well. I'm just going to leave that off for now. And then that's it. You can just hit create, and then it will create the service for you. So this will just take a few seconds, but I've already got a pre-created resource here that I will go into. So this is what the resource looks like when you've created it. You can get your keys and your endpoint for your service to authenticate to it to make API calls. You can do things like turn on the private endpoints or the firewall for the service. You can turn on or off your managed identities as well. Normally this is priced pay as you go, so it's paid for by the number of pages that you process. There is also commitment tier pricing for this as well. So if you wanted to process like 1 million pages a month, you could actually pay for a commitment tier and get a discount on the services as well. But really, when you're actually going to play around with this, test this out, actually create a custom model, you're really going to go to the Document Intelligence Studio. So on your Document Intelligence resource in the Azure portal, just from the Overview tab, if you kind of scroll down, you will see something here that says, try out the Document Intelligence Studio. So if you click this link, it will then take you to your Document Intelligence Studio here. You will just have to click this button up here to actually sign in, and then pick your account that you're signing in with. And then from here, you would actually pick your subscription and the actual resource that you want to use. I've already got this predefined in another window here. So you'll see here on this main homepage within the service, you've got the 3 different types of models that I talked about earlier in the presentation. So we've got the sort of standard document analysis types models for things like doing just raw OCR layouts or things like that. You've got your pre-built models, so things like invoices, receipts, ID documents like passports, health insurance cards. There's a lot of US financial type forms in here as well. Credit cards, contracts, business cards, and things like that. And then finally down here, you have your different types of custom models as well. So the custom extraction model, those are those custom template and custom neural models I talked about, as well as the custom classification model for figuring out what custom model to use to analyze a document. I'm going to quickly show a few of the out-of-the-box things. So the nice thing about the Document Studio is if you click one of these predefined models, you'll see here on kind of the left-hand side, you've got a number of different samples that we've pre-created for you to actually do this. So I'm going to pick one of these here. So I'll just scroll up a little bit here. So this is a resume. So this is a common use case that a lot of customers have, is to use this service to actually extract out data from resumes that have been uploaded to, say, your job application portal. So, if I just run this model as is, this will just take a few seconds to actually analyze that document. And you'll see here that it's kind of highlighted in yellow, and I'll try and zoom in a little bit here. So it's identified all these different chunks of text. And so if you look here on the right-hand side, you can see here's a list of all the different content that was extracted. Here it's a lot of placeholder data, though. You can see here it's extracted out things like the name, headers, other things, work experience, dates, and things like that. You notice it also identifies things like this is actually the location on the page of that data too. So we actually use this in our own portal for actually being able to draw boxes around the documents as well. If you actually create this result tab, you'll see here all the JSON for what the service actually returns. So you can see there's a lot of different elements. So it breaks down all the different pages of the document. In this case, I only have a single page. It breaks down the text into paragraphs and things like that. If we look at the custom model in a few minutes, you'll actually see there's more stuff about all the predefined fields that I've created. Then finally, there's some sample code that you can use for Python, JavaScript, and C#. We don't have any Java samples on here, but those are also supported in our SDK. So if you kind of want to learn how to actually, call the service yourself, you can actually take a look at the sample code that we have here in various different languages to learn how to use the service yourself. So if we go back now to the home page, take a look at some of the other stuff. We can take a look at the receipts model. So here we've got a few sample receipts. So I'm going to take this one here. That's a typical photo of a receipt that you might have for an expense claim. Run the analysis on that. And then what we can see here is it's extracted out. So everything with a box around it is something that the model has identified as text. And so you can see here we've got the merchant name, the merchant address, the phone number. In this case, this is the date of the receipt. You can see here different line items for what was bought along with the prices, and it's extracted out the subtotal, tax, and the grand total. So if you see here on the right-hand side, you can see here all these different fields. So here you can see the merchant address, and that's been broken down into all its constituent components like street address, street name, city, zip code, or postal code, and things like that. If we expand out this table at the top here of items, you can see it's actually broken out each individual line item separately. So you can see here what the line item was, description, quantity, and price as well. This is all reflected in the underlying JSON that's returned back to the service. So once again, if we kind of scroll through this here, you can see we've got all the individual fields that were extracted. So you've got things like the items. Sorry, this is a little hard to see here because of the size. Let me just shrink this down a little bit. So you'll see things here on the right, like the individual line items from the receipt items down there. If we kind of collapse that up, you'll see the other fields out here, like the merchant address, and that's broken out into sub-values, the merchant name, etc. So all that is really easy to parse out from the JSON document afterwards. So what we're going to look at next is we're going to look at the custom models. So if you want to create a custom model, there's a few steps that you need to do with that. So first off, you would create a project, and I'm going to give this a name here. You're going to figure out what resource that you want to use. So I'm going to browse to the resource group where I have my document intelligence resource. You can choose to say what version of the API you want to use. Generally speaking, you'd be using the latest GA version. The region I'm in doesn't have the latest beta version installed, but if I was in a version like our East US region, I'd be able to pick that as well and test out newer features that are coming down the pipe. Then I have to say where are my training document samples stored. So I'm going to browse once again to my resource group, pick my storage account. I'm going to pick the folder that contains my files. And if I had a subfolder within that, I could specify that as well. And I'm just going to say, go create my project. So now you can see here, it's actually, I've already pre-uploaded 5 PDFs to this document. So you can see here, all these different samples that I have, they're all kind of like poor quality scans actually. So what you do is, if you want to create a custom model, is you would first, once you've sort of ingested all your documents here, you would actually run the layout model against all of these so it can identify all the text and where it's positioned on the screen. But then I would go in here and then actually add out all the fields that I want to capture. So I might add a new field here, like say customer name. And you can name this whatever you'd like. Generally, we recommend using camel case or Pascal case for your field names. And then I can also identify things like, what do I want the data type to be? Strings, numbers, dates, times, integers, things like that. I might also add in things like the customer address, street, or just the customer address. And then also, you'll notice down here I have a table of line items. If I click this little box here, you can see what the service automatically extracts out by default. I can also then create my own table if I want a little bit more control over that. So I can say, well, I've got a invoice item table. And in this case, I can say it's got a fixed number of rows, or in this case, it could be dynamic. So I could have 2 rows, I could have 5 rows, 10 rows, etc. So I'm just going to say it's dynamic. And then here, if I click this table, I can define when I'm training this form. I say, well, this has got 3 rows that I need to train, and I've got 3 columns in here. So I've got an item name, I've got a quantity, oops, and then I want to add in a 3rd column, which is amount. And then if I want to train this form now, so basically if I'm training the table, I can basically just highlight all the different fields, and then click on the field in the table that it corresponds to. And the same thing for the quantities. And then finally the amounts. And then I can also then do this for the other fields that I have in my data. So I could say here, this is the customer name. Oh, sorry, not. So I can then just say, well, it's a customer name, and maybe these fields down here are the customer address. And then I've got the invoice date up here. And that's it. So I just have to do that for all my different samples. And then once I've done that, I can hit the train button, and it will take, like a couple of minutes to, tens of minutes, depending on the type of model that you're using. And then you will have a trained up model. So I've already got one that I've pre-created here. So we're going to my other project. And so you can see here, I've got a different type of form. I've pre-trained each one of these 5 samples and identified, oh, like this data here is like the customer address. These are things here are the individual line items I have in my invoice and things like that. So I've then completed that, and I've already trained the model. So if I go to my list of models here, I can see all the different ones that I've trained, and I can test an individual model. So I can just browse for a new file sample here. Oops, do that. I can run the analysis on this. And now you can see here, it's already extracted out the fields. It's actually, put everything in the proper field names that I've created for my custom model. And it's also extracted out all the different line items for the table here. So it's gotten the quantity, the description, the unit price, and the line total. If I want to see this in more of a grid format, I can see that as well. So you can kind of see this is all kind of been pre-extracted out by that model. If I look at the JSON as well, and I'll just go down to the fields section here, documents. So within here, you'll be able to see my fields. So you can see my customer ID field that comes up right here. So 5791, you can see that's been extracted out into a particular JSON element in my document here. I've got my invoice number, 1975, that's come from here, and things like that. So you can see this makes it really easy to kind of get data out of this form, as opposed to me just doing raw OCR and then trying to parse out the form and look for field names and trying to figure out what's close in proximity. The service does all that for you and then gives you like a nicely structured chunk of JSON to be able to get all that data out. So it's really easy now in another program to actually consume that data out. So that's a very quick demo of that. Now, if you actually wanted to create a composed model, if I actually had multiple different models I've trained here for maybe different types of forms, so like in that tax example I had where I had a 1040 form and a 1099 form, I could actually select both of these and then click this compose button, and that will create a combined model using all the different custom types here. So now when I want to analyze a document and I don't know what type it is, I just send it to the service and say, hey, use this composed model to analyze it, and it will figure out which of these submodels is the correct one to use. So. Okay, and with that, that is a very quick run through of the service. So let me switch back to my slides here. So hopefully that gives you an idea of what the service can do, how that you can actually use it using either the predefined models or creating your own custom model. So what we like to do now is we're going to leave a little bit of time to take some questions that people might have had from taking a look at this presentation today. So let me go through the questions that Elixir has flagged for us. So the first question here from Coffee Maker Zero is they're asking, is it usually one API transaction per image, per page, per document, etc.? So typically when you're sending up a file to be analyzed, you're sending an entire document, and that document might have multiple pages in it. How we actually price out the service, though, is per page. So if you uploaded a single PDF that contains 5 pages in it, and you said analyze all 5 pages, then we would charge you for each of those 5 pages when we run it through the service. So the next question is, Ginny Shans asks, do we also have any service which can convert it from a different language to English or another language? So yes, so we have a service called AI Translator. So what you can do is once you've run this document through Document Intelligence to actually extract out the text, you can actually then run it through the AI Translator service to translate it from whatever the language was in the document to one of a number, I think hundreds of languages we support now. So you can go from like English to French or Chinese to Japanese to German to Spanish. So there's a lot of different things you can go, and we support a lot of different dialects as well. So like if you wanted to distinguish between, say, Canadian French versus France French, you could do that kind of thing within the translator service as well. So we now have another question from Abhijit. So can we share a project between multiple Azure accounts? Not really. So the project is really linked to a single AI document intelligence resource. So the way you would have different users say, maybe train models within that resource is you could use role-based access control to all give them access to be able to either use a model to consume it, to actually run documents through it, or to actually train a model as well. But ultimately, once you've got a trained model, that service just basically has a RESTful API endpoint and an account key. So you could give that to applications that are running in a completely different Azure subscription or an Azure tenant, and they could still consume the service provided you don't have the network restrictions locked down. As long as whatever is calling that service can see it and they have the key to be able to authorize access to it, or they're using some sort of managed identity that's been granted RBAC permissions on it, then they should be able to use that service regardless of where the consumer is hosted and where the source or the actual document intelligence service lives. So I think there's a follow-up question from the same person about, are we planning to integrate form recognizer or document intelligence with Azure OpenAI? So we don't have anything publicly announced on the roadmap for any integrations like that. Although if you look at some of the stuff that we have in Azure OpenAI today, like especially the Azure OpenAI on your own data feature, I believe a lot of that actually under the hood uses the document intelligence service to do the actual extraction of data so that it can do things like the chunking and embeddings before it loads it into like an Azure AI search index. So that kind of integration is kind of built in there today. And certainly you could also do that yourself within your architectures. As to whether the actual document intelligence service itself will directly use Azure OpenAI, like I said, they don't have anything publicly announced, but I would suggest we have our Build conference coming up in May, where we release a lot of new features to the different services and things like that across all of Azure. So I'd recommend you kind of check that out, because any announcements that the product team for Azure Document Intelligence will likely come out at that conference. So anything new. So we got another question from the same person about, is it possible to get the cost per model so that how many pages are extracted using a particular model during a certain period? So we do have metrics within the portal itself. I actually don't know off the top of my head whether that's down to the model level or if that's really just to the service level. I'd recommend checking out sort of the built-in metrics that we have in there. So, you can go into the portal, and let me just bring that up. Take a quick look at that live here. So if we go to the Azure portal, and then we take a look at the metrics tab, like you would have on everything else. So you can pick the standard metrics here. So we do have things like the number of calls, but I don't believe this is specific to the particular model. And I don't think, I could be wrong, but I don't think there is even an API call you can see to how many calls were done a particular model. Might be something you could check the documentation now just to double check on that. But at the very least, at the metrics, you could see this. Now, if you wanted to kind of do this at a little more level of granularity, you could do a separate resource per kind of workload or per model that you're doing, because it's, unless you're using commitment tiers, it's done per page per transaction. There's no danger necessarily in creating multiple different AI resources, because they're only billed by the number of pages they process. So that would be one way to get a little bit more granularity. So Diana Boone has a question about when we have a custom model, are there any good practices to make the training of the model better? So for instance, finding a quantity that should only be between a certain number range. If you look at the official Azure documentation for the service at learn.microsoft.com, They do list a number of different best practices around there to kind of improve the quality of data extraction. Unfortunately, we don't necessarily have anything that would do that kind of validation, like a number has to be between a particular range. That would be something you would kind of have to do yourself and sort of code to do some post-processing after you've gotten the data extracted. Kind of the most you could do within the service itself right now would be to say, oh, this field is actually a number as opposed to like a string. So that, I believe, behind the scenes actually gives the sort of the machine learning models a bit more information about how it extracts the data if you tell something is explicitly a date or a number or a string, as opposed to just something generic. Um, so Jamie has a question about an example of the progress made in interpreting handwritten text. So I don't really have a sample or a demo ready to go here, but with a custom template, I think actually it might be both sets of models. There is the ability to do handwriting recognition with the service. I think your kind of mileage may vary depending on the quality of the handwriting and how cryptic it might be. So I don't really have any good anecdotal sort of experience on sort of how good that is, but I know in general the product teams have done a lot of investment to try and do things with handwriting as well. So I think I'd recommend, generally speaking, try that yourself and see what you get. But like I said, it really will depend highly on the kind of the quality of the documents that you're getting in. But the models do support handwriting. So Jay has a question about the OCR not recognizing certain characters as text. In some cases, it comes back as slashes. Is there a way to custom train the underlying OCR model? So not really. So the only thing to kind of do there is really to give it enough samples when you're building out your custom model. But having said that, you may still get it recognizing things as slashes or as pipe characters instead of what you actually want it to do. There's not really any way to further tune the model beyond that. Once again, when I've worked with customers that have kind of run into that scenario, we typically do a bunch of post-processing on that. So if we see something consistently come across like slashes or pipes, and we know those actually should be ignored, or they should actually be ones or I's or something like that, we'll typically clean that up in a bunch of post-processing code. But unfortunately, there's not really a lot you can do short of providing more training samples to tweak the custom models. So Tony asks, is there a way to determine in advance of what type of document you have or which model to use? So once again, you could use that custom classification model. So basically that you could feed it the document, it will try and figure out what model to use, but not actually perform the data extraction. Or you could use a custom composed model, in which case, same thing, give it a document, it will figure out what model to use, and it will use that model to extract out the data. Other examples I've seen where maybe because somebody's trying to optimize for cost and they don't want to use the custom extraction or composed models is sometimes they'll use just the read model, which is a bit cheaper to use. They will just do raw OCR on the text, and then they will just search through that text for a form code that they're expecting, like say at the bottom of a page, and they will use that to figure out, oh, this is a form 1099, therefore I want to use the 1099 custom model. So sometimes you could do that kind of thing to sort of pre-figure out what custom model that you actually want to use. So Malky has a question about a PDF with images in that, and they have to split each page to get it to work. So any recommendations on sort of the size for the page to send, and especially for layout analyzing? So I mean, there's a couple of things here. So really, if you've got a lot of different forms contained within a single PDF type, and you're not really sure which pages you want to analyze or what models to use or things like that, sometimes, like I said, just with the previous question, you can run it through kind of raw OCR to figure out, okay, well, page 1 is this, and maybe I don't want to send it to Document Intelligence. Page 2 to 4 is an actual form, and I want to send that to model X. And pages 6 through 8 are a bunch of legal boilerplate that I want to ignore. So sometimes some people will just do some pre-processing using just like the read model to get the raw text out and make some of those decisions out. If you've got things like images, there is an add-on that you can add on just by specifying a parameter in the API call, or you can do this in the studio as well, to basically say, oh, I've got like a high-res image, like say a blueprint or something like that, and then it will kick in a bunch of extra stuff on the back end to make it to analyze through those high res type of detailed images. So if that's the kind of thing you have in your document, there is some extra thing you can do with that. But otherwise, there is the ability in the API calls to specify, rather than analyzing an entire document, I can specify page ranges that can either be continuous or non-continuous. So just like, when you're printing out a Word, I can say, well, just do pages 1, 5 to 6, and 12. So you can do that in the API call as well. So if you know which pages you want to analyze, you can be that more specific in the API call when you're doing that. So B Home has a question about, does document intelligence work for structured text such as research papers? Yeah, I believe so. So we do have some predefined document models. I don't know if we have a research paper sample. I know we do have financial like report samples. So let me take a look at my general document stuff. So you see here, we've got some standard like SEC type forms. I've got some standard invoice forms. So I don't think we have one specific to that, but you could try the general document model as a start, because when you run an analysis on here, it will try and actually extract out some key value pairs and things like that. I don't know how well it would work on research documents, but it wouldn't surprise me if they had trained that on, because it's a fairly large corpus of documents that they use for a lot of this stuff. So the general document model might be a good way to start with that. So we have another question from Abhijit about once they train a model, if they get the flexibility to share it with another project, that would be great. I know they were trying to do some things around making it a little easier for multiple users to be able to see the same project, but I don't think they've done anything with sharing a model between projects. I think the model still tends to be fairly centric. You might want to check. I think there are some backup restore features, though, where you might be able to export out some of the definitions of the model and then import it into another project. I know that's not ideal. That's not quite exactly the same as sharing a model between the two, because it would require you to kind of keep doing that on a regular basis. But that might be one way to do that. I'm trying to think. There was another way I was thinking that other people have kind of done that as well. But that I'd say that's kind of one way to do that, is kind of doing an export out. Oh, the other thing too is that there's nothing necessarily to stop two projects with two different models from accessing the same storage account. You could do that. I recommend to be a little careful about that, because if one project happens to like add a new field and then retag all the documents, the other project would get that as well, which may be what you want. So that's another way to do it, is have the same storage account, same training files, create two separate projects, but both point to the same storage account. I believe they should pick up the same set of training files, because all that training data, like the base layout data and the field names, is actually stored within the storage account itself in JSON files that you can actually see. So that'd be another way to kind of do some sharing. So Jay has a question about a custom document that's always a table with checkboxes and it's always the same structure. What's the best way to use a custom model for that? So that's a good question. So if you've got a fairly static layout, and so I've seen this with say a lab requisition form, where you've got like 50 checkboxes, they're all in the same position. The best way to honestly probably do that with a custom model is to train each individual checkbox out as a separate field, because when you actually get the output out of that at the end, each one of those checkbox will appear as a separate JSON element in that kind of output JSON document. So it really makes it easy to say, okay, go look for, somebody ordered a blood test. That just shows up as a field. You can try training that as a table, but then I find that when you look at the JSON that comes out, you tend to get like a column value that says : unselected : and then the name of the field that might have appeared after that. So you can do it as a table, but it requires a lot more sort of string processing on the back end after the fact. I'd say it's a lot easier to just spend the effort up front, create all those checkboxes as separate fields. It's a little tedious, but you really only have to do that for 5 samples to start to be able to get that out, and it'll make it far easier in your data extraction afterwards. So Salvador has a question about what the template should be used to analyze an Excel file. So the only models that will support Office files, and those are like the PPTX or XLSX or Word or DocX files, is really only the basic layout or general document analysis models. So there's no real recommendation on what that should look like. It's really just send it to those models, because there's no custom training you can do on that, and see what the quality of the document is output. If you want to use a custom model, unfortunately, what you'd have to do with that Excel file is save it out to like a PDF or an image format, and then you could send it against a custom model. So something like you could screenshot it, save it to PDF, like out of Word, and then be able to analyze it there. At that point, like if it's a standard kind of, grid-like layout in Excel, should be fairly easy to have that come out as a table. If it's more of a form you've created within your Excel document with headers and footers, it should generally come out looking like something similar to like an invoice and things like that. Once again, either the predefined invoice model or custom model should be relatively easy to train on that, but you will have to get it out of Excel into a PDF or an image format to use it with a custom model. The Excel format's only going to work with the general layout or general document models. So the next question we have is, if we have multiple invoices in a single PDF, would we need to use the custom classification to determine the page number and split it and then extract it out using Document Intelligence? So yeah, you could do it a couple of different ways. Yes, you could use, probably in this case, the custom classification model to figure out, okay, well, what model should be used for each page. And then you get the JSON back, but it doesn't actually do the data extraction. And then you can make a decision about, yeah, that looks like the right model to use for that page, or I want to skip that other page. So that would be one way to do that. The other way to do it, like I said before, would be to run it through like a lower cost service, like just use the Read API within Document Intelligence, or just use our custom vision service or computer vision service to actually just do basic raw OCR, and then look for like a form code on the page or something like that to figure out, okay, well, page 1 has this form code, so I should use this model. So that's one way to do that. Otherwise, like I said, yeah, use a custom classification model and get it to figure out what to use. And so I think our final question that we have here from Ginny is, do we have pre-built models to take PDFs with drawings, charts to extract text and images separately? So this is really only meant to extract out the text. We really don't have anything in the service to extract out the images themselves. What you can do is, if you were to look at this, I'm trying to think if we have a example of this, because I know we had an example here of an engineering diagram. So in the analyze options, you can do things like pick out high resolution, say it's a high resolution image. If I had mathematical formulas in there, I could specify that as well. So if I run the analysis here, it's actually not going to sort of divide this up into separate images, but what it will do is it will extract out all the text that appears on here. So all the sort of measurements or dimensions, as well as everything in kind of the table down here, like who the document might be for, or information about the client, things like that, would all get extracted out as well, even though this is kind of a very high resolution document. So that's about the extent of what you can do with things like drawings and stuff like that. There might be some other stuff. You might want to look at some of our other computer vision or custom vision services if you wanted to do things like extract out or do image recognition within a document. Those services might be a little more suited to this. Document Intelligence is really centered around extracting out text and things like that from the docs. So, okay, and with that, I think that's all the questions we have. And I know we're kind of really right up on time here. So I want to say thanks again to everybody for attending my talk today. Hopefully you got some more information and more knowledge around the Document Intelligence service, and that you'll hopefully use it in the future in your use cases. So with that, back to you, Alexia.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Richard, for this great session. And yeah, we will see you hopefully on the next one.